The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, this is Nick Morell with Audio Video Export. I'm Sales Manager here. If you're familiar with my voice because you and I have had the pleasure of speaking before, please forgive me. I'm a little hoarse, but fortunately you're not going to be having to hear me. We've got on the line with us Juan Pablo and Manfredo of Polaris Controls, which are the rep companies for Luxul. We are the distributors; they are the rep companies. So they're at our service. But we'd like to be your first point of contact here with audio video exports. We've got in-house capabilities to be able to help you out with design, but we also keep stock here, and as well as technical support. So we can do all that in-house, and then for some of the bigger stuff, we rely on Polaris and then Luxul in order to be able to support us in any way possible. But we've got the absolute pleasure of having JP and Manfredo here to help us out with an awesome presentation. We will be here. I've got also both Georges, Ocampo and Vera on the line with us. If you have any questions, you can feel free to push a question in the question box. We are monitoring that and we'll be reviewing that towards the end. If there aren't any questions, either we lost you or you guys are just brilliant and you got everything. Either one is okay, but if we did lose you, we want to make sure that we go down into the details. We're going to talk a lot today about the Wi-Fi and the merits of Luxul, but in particular, we wanted to also broach on VLANs and the importance of being able to properly set up a guest network and a VLAN for that, because oftentimes people are setting up a guest network, but they're not setting up a VLAN separate for it. So the value add of having a VLAN is nothing because there's no separation of that LAN for the guests, which means that they have access to everything that the main LAN has access to. And the entire purpose of having a guest network is to separate that for security purposes, whether it be that you don't want them to touch your Sonos network, whether it be that you don't want them to touch your NAS drive, whatever the case may be. And so this is going to be really important. We are recording this, and we will make sure that this recording is available to you after the fact. I don't want to take any more time, spilling the beans. Wanted to say thank you again, JP, for being here, and thank you everybody else for attending. JP, it's all yours.
Thank you, Nick, for the introduction and for letting us discuss this important subject on it. So as Nick told us, we are Polaris Controls. We're the reps for Luxul, and we're gonna do a quick overview before we go to into deep on the Wi-Fi configuration and the VLAN creation for a guest Wi-Fi network. So we're gonna do a quick product overview of the architecture and infrastructure of a proper network, and we're just going to do a quick product overview as well. So networking, there's some basics on networking that I probably think that you're familiar with on what's the router, the switch, the access point, and within Luxul and within any network being created, I think PDU it's really important for making things a little more reliable. Either you're doing home integration or just rebooting your ISP modem or something. I think that's really important. So the router, it's basically the one that connects and transfers data between two or more networks. Being that in a residential network, it's the one that's going to be connected to the internet, and it's better and it's a best practice to always put a router between your network and your ISP provider. I think it's a good way to do it, and also because ISP routers or modems are probably not capable of doing VLANs and some high-end configuration.
In addition to that, if I can get in there, there are going to be a couple of things that you're going to want to do in addition to having our router in between the ISP provided router. Number one, make sure that you turn off the Wi-Fi access point that's built into the ISP's router, because that's going to create all sorts of confusion for your users. And then number two, you are going to want to put DMZ mode, and you're going to want to point that DMZ, that's the demilitarized zone, within their router. You want to point that to our router. That way, our router's operating, without any kind of settings from the ISP's router. So those are going to be two important distinctions that you're going to want to do on the ISP's router. Turn off the Wi-Fi and put our router into the DMZ.
Yeah, that's for sure. So the other one important, and I think it's either of the three of us that are really, really important, but the switch is the one that's going to transfer and connect to every equipment in your network. I always think that if you have the ability to connect something physically to the network, I think it's the better way to do it. I know in some points and some clients tend to try to do it everything in wireless mode, but I honestly think that connecting everything to the switch and being able to manage it from the starting point to the rack, it's a way better. Access points is just a physical translation of your network to wireless. And this is probably where we are experiencing most of the problems, and we're going to talk about how Luxul is able to work and help you have better roaming, and also to configure a rock-solid Wi-Fi network with a wireless controller. The PDUs, it's just for power cycling devices, but we're able to do auto ping and some cool things that you're able to do, and it's like will be a self-healing application. So this is just some terminology that I know you're familiar with, but we wanted to discuss it first. So routers, we have a lot of, not a lot, but a rock-solid family of products. So we have wireless routers and wired routers. Where should I use, or what routers should I use? It depends on the software features included, the number of supported clients, and when you're doing a wireless router, placement is also a key. Wireless routers are mainly used for smaller networks. It needs to be placed central to desired coverage area. Obviously, it's going to need local power. And in our territory in Latin America, local power, it's better if you can put it through either a PDU, or if you can put it through a UPS in order to have a better power. It's always a good practice to do it. It is great if it's a single wireless router, but if you need to add more access points to that network, all of our wireless routers have a built-in controller that you can add up to 2 more access points to it. Wired routers are more flexible. Mainly they are installed on a rack or with the equipment it's being placed. It's placed out of sight probably. It's gonna be by the side of your ISP provider and probably your AV gear. You have to use access points in order to create a wireless coverage. It doesn't need to be power over Ethernet, the APs, but always it's a best practice to do it that way in order you can have remote control of them, and you don't need to have a power outlet in order to have it connected. And the most important thing, and something that we're going to discuss, is how to configure a wireless controller and how is it going to help us do the active roaming that we at Luxul are very great with. So few router features that all of the routers have. They have robust routing performance, VLANs, quality of service. The controller, it's built into wireless router. We have 2 softwares that we're partners with. One of them, it's Damat. Damat, it's like a remote management system. And Router Limits, it's an internet administration software that will help you. And we're going to look a little bit of what features does it have. Most of our routers have a dual WAN connection, or either a multi-WAN connection. And one of them has a very special connection that has a gigabit WAN-to-LAN connection and an AVR 5000. So how to set up a Luxul router, or how to set up the basics on a Luxul router. So the first is to connect and verify that your WAN, either it's connected on DHCP or static, and it depends on your ISP provider. So you should better contact them on what they are doing. You need to do the DMZ, the demilitarized zone that Nick was telling you about. But something that I probably find within a lot of projects in entire Latin America is that most of dealers are still using the primary and secondary DNS of their ISP providers. And that's something that it works, but I think DNS from Google, it's the best practice to do it. They're more like updated, but most important thing is that they always work. Most of the problems we have when we are not able to connect to the internet, it's not that we're not having an internet connection, it's just that the DNS server from our ISP, it's held down. So I think configuring primary and secondary DNS pointing to Google, it's the best way to go. And those addresses are the ones that are shown in screen, 8.8, 8.8.8 on the primary and .4.4 on the secondary DNS. So that's your connection to the internet or the WAN. And now for the local network, that's where you're going to put your router IP LAN address it's going to be. Most used address are starting in 192.168. Other range have also been used a lot, mainly in small commercial applications as well. It's 10.10.10. So it depends on your configuration. Most use it's 192.168.0 or .1. It depends. Second thing you need to configure, it's your DHCP server. And this is something that most of the times we just leave it as default, but it's a good thing when you have a large network to create room for the entire devices being connected to the network. So the configuration starting range, it's the one that you want to see. So that range from start to end, it's the one with the router. When every device is being connected to it, it will give them an address between that range. Second thing, and I think this is really important, it's for AV gear or for home automation or for some devices that you need to put a static IP address in order to always know what the address is. So these probably you can find examples on home automation systems that you need to, let's say, connect to a cassette bridge. You need to know always what the address of that cassette bridge is going to be when you're configuring whatever home automation system you have. So there's two ways to do this. There's the static IP that it's set on each end device. So in this case, you should log into the cassette app in that example and configure a static IP in that app. So it will not change without user input. So it's something you need to do. And it's always usually for devices that will not leave the network. So these are your lighting control, your AV gear, or something like that. Other way, it's to do it on a static lease or a reserved DHCP address. And that's being set up on the router and not on the device. So it actually is going to use the DHCP server. So every time this device connects to the network, the router will see the MAC address. That's the physical network address of each device. That's singular to that device. And it will assign the same IP address every time. So in that cassette bridge, for example, if at some point you're unplugging it or rebooting it or something, every time it'll connect, it'll have the same IP address. Most of the time, that address will be inside the DHCP range, but it also, you can configure it on the router to be assigned outside the range. I think that's a better way to do it. So it won't use your DHCP range. And here is a screenshot. This is actually my network. So this is being configured on a wireless router network. So what you need to do is on the segment that you can see the add lease, you'll type in the description. So I did an example of a Lotrin Caseta bridge, put on a host name, and you need to type two things: the IP address that you need to every time to be set on the every time the device has connect to the network, and the MAC address. So I plug in a fake MAC address just to give a quick example, and you can do it as many static assignments as you need. I found that this is a better way to deal with static IP addresses. If you at some point need to switch a router, you can also save this configuration, plug it into another router, and you're ready to go. So this is something that's really great. So every time you do the same type of jobs, every time the Caseta bridge has the same IP address, every time your home automation controller has the same IP address. So this is a good way to do it in every job. So your technicians or you in the field always know what the address and what types of devices are being connected to that network. So we're going to talk about right now on the switches. I don't know if you guys have any question regarding routers or basic configuration of routers. We're going to dip into creating the VLAN later on. We just want to go through a quick overview of each of the architecture and infrastructure of a network. So switches. So Luxul has a lot of switches, from a small 5-port desk switch to stackable, managed layer 2 and layer 3 PoE switches that you can use it for IP video distribution, surveillance, or your AV equipment. So some features that are unique in our AV and CI channel industry is that all of our Luxul switches are full speed. So what do we mean as all of our Luxul switches are full speed? It says that the switch backplane speed, it's the double the number of the ports. So for example, if you have a 24-port switch, our backplane, our processor capacity, it's gonna run up to 48 gigabits per second. So this is a unique feature we have on our CI channel, that it's gonna guarantee that every port connected to your network, it's gonna work at full speed always.
And just to change that and add in there, JP, oftentimes competitors will use similar terminology like simplex or duplex. This is what's called duplex, which means that you've got a full gigabit down and a full gigabit up simultaneous. So this is the best kind of technology that currently exists.
That's right. So I think this is one of the unique features that disperses us from the rest of the networking solutions, is that all of our switches are this way. So it's not just one specific family, it's going to be all of our product lineup. So most features, or most used features, we have unmanaged and managed switches. We have PoE and some switches. You should be careful when overlooking to some of our PoE switches, because not all of our switches, all of the ports are PoE. So for example, in the 1208P switches, the 1208, it means 12 for 12 ports, but the 08, it's claiming just to have 8 PoE switches, ports, sorry. So that's something you should definitely look whenever you're creating or quoting or designing a network. So all of our switches that are managed switches are capable of managing on layer 2 and layer 3. So layer 2 is the basic MAC switching, is what most switches are able to have. And layer 3, it's a layer that can be used for routing. So it has and manage IP addresses and protocol aware. So we're able to create VLANs with this kind of switches. And these are being used in video distribution solutions like Just Add Power, or it's being used also in creating guest networks or surveillance networks. That is one of the examples we're going to do live at the end. So this is something that you should definitely, if you're not doing it in your networks right now, it's a best practice to go and always put at least one managed 24-port switch per project. 24-port if the network it's like the typical. You can do it a little less if you need, but it's the best practice to always at least put a managed switch on your network. So basic configuration on the switches, this is not a brain deal. So one of the things we should definitely look into is that Luxul switches have a running configuration and a startup configuration. So that's very neat when you're in the process in between of configuring a switch. So if you commit a mistake, if you haven't saved the running configuration to startup configuration, you can just reboot the switch and it will bring back to the latest configuration you have it running in. The other thing is that you should always be aware that after finishing setting up the switch, you should always go to administration configuration and save that running configuration into startup configuration. If not, at any time, if you have power outage and the switch is rebooting, it will make either default or the last saved startup configuration. So you'll probably be holding up a problem within that client's network.
As a personal preference, I also like to download and save a copy of that on my computer. So God forbid something were to happen to the switch, you wouldn't have to redo it all over again. Because, stuff happens. It's a very low defect rate, but just in case.
That's right. And adding up to that, if you, within your company, always use like the same kind of gear and already assign, like for example, all of my access points are being configured from address .10 to .15, let's say, and my lighting control system is gonna be held on between these IP static addresses, and that's a good thing because you can always save that config and you can continue to use that same config into multiple jobs that are alike, so you're able to save time and not start configuring every time you have a new project. So that's also a good tip. Thank you, Nick. So access points, and this is where we wanted to take a little more time from today's webinar because this is where most of our problems are being occurred on a network. So we just want to do a quick review of what's Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is the Ethernet standard for wireless Ethernet communication, and it works in 2 bands. So it's working in 2.4 gigahertz. That's the standard typical Wi-Fi application. But because of all noise and things going into that 2.5 frequency, like 6B gear, baby monitors, and a lot of stuff, there's also another band that's an upper end frequency that's 5 gigahertz, and it's being more used because it's faster. But typical characteristics or features from these two, it's that 2.4 will go twice the distance because it has, or it's working on a lower frequency that will have better obstacle penetration. So when you configure an access point to work in 2.4 and 5, you'll see that you'll have better coverage in your 2.54 network, than your 5 network. So that's something you need to look into every time you're doing design on a Wi-Fi network.
Hey,
The other
sorry, JP. Edelson, I see that you've got your hand raised. We don't have a way to be able to unmute you in particular, so if you've got a question, go ahead and please, put that in the question box, and we'll make sure that we get to that immediately.
So something that's happening inside this frequency where the Wi-Fi works is that we have specific channels in order to be transmitting at the same time. So the 2.4 gigahertz frequency has 11 channels, but only 3 of those do not overlap. And what does this mean? The thing is, when you configure access points in channels that are overlapping, you'll have non-working Wi-Fi channels and having sticky problems from one access point going to another when you're doing roaming. So those 3 non-overlapping channels are 1, 6, and 11. And this is something you should consider when you're not using a wireless controller. If you're using a wireless controller, that's the best practice. You don't need to care of channel configuration, because the controller is going to do it for you, and it's going to manage all your wireless networks. So you don't need to be doing and searching and site surveying your channels. The 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi network is much faster. It has a less crowded frequency, but will not have that better obstacle penetration. And I always do this and tell the example between the FM and AM radio. So if you go into a basement or underground parking, you probably see that you have better radio signal coming into AM frequencies than FM frequencies. And that's because AM, it's a much lower frequency that FM radio goes. So lower the frequency, the better the optical penetration. So that's something you should definitely consider, especially in Latin America, that we don't have wood walls or this kind of thing. We have concrete, and so we should definitely look something between considering this 5 gigahertz network, that you're going to need probably twice the access points that you need in order to have the same amount of coverage. So the good thing about a 5 gigahertz network is that it has 8 non-overlapping channels. So when you're manually configuring without a controller, that's something that you need to know, that every you can put either in whatever channel you can your access points, because you're not going to have overlapping channels. So another thing to consider between having good coverage is the signal strength. So signal strength in a Wi-Fi network is measured in -dB. That says that the higher the number, the closest to 0 is going to be the best signal you have. So every time the signal drops -3 dB, it's being doubled or being half cut. It's in its strength. So between -40 and -50, you're having probably 3 times less signal. And that's something that you need to really take into consideration and doing your site survey after you finish up your wireless network. So what is considered a good signal strength? Typical connections are between -50 to -75. And that's a good connection. You have a good internet speed, and that's something that you should definitely not be experiencing any problem with that. Beyond -75, that's a slippery slope. You're going to be having internet problems. If you're doing Skype calls or audio streaming, you're going to be having some glitches in that, either your audio or video streaming. The goal is to have always from -70 or better. So you should go into consider it between having into that, if you see on the chart on your right, either in your pale green to your solid yellow. That's the best way to have the internet connection. So how far does Wi-Fi go? So Wi-Fi Go, it depends on the Wi-Fi transmit power. And you can see on your right graph that it's not showing that other manufacturers don't have this amount of power built into their access points. This is just claiming that every access point we have, it's going to do 1 watt of output power. And that's probably even twice or 4 times more than traditional access points will deliver. So that will make us have a real coverage increase between 2 to 3 times than standard access points. And that is something that I consider between the Luxul being full speed switches and this amount of power with our Luxul active roaming, some 3 key features that will help you in any network guarantee that Luxul is the best way to go. So we have a broad amount of access points into our family. We have a new one that's not in this slide, that is new 1610, that it has a 4x4 antenna. We have also an outdoor access point, and you should notice that that access point is only working on 2.4 gigahertz, and it's not gonna create a 5 gigahertz network. So all of our indoor access point will broadcast in an omnidirectional pattern, as pretty much all of the access point does, but the outdoor will broadcast in a straight pattern. And that's because you wanna concentrate the amount of power we're delivering from the access point to the exterior, and not do it in an omnidirectional pattern, because you don't need the access point connection inside the house. It can be used standalone or with a controller. And every access point we deliver, it comes with a PoE included injector. So if you have budget cutouts in a project that you already have specified a managed PoE switch, I suggest not to eliminate the managed portion of your network, but to eliminate the PoE portion of your switch. So we have, for example, an AMS 2600 switch that it's a 24-port switch that it's managed both in layers 2 and layer 3 that doesn't include PoE, but every access point that you're going to use in your network, it comes with an included PoE injector. So that's a good way when you have projects that have a cutoff budget, that you can always remain with a managed network solution. That, remember, it's the best tip or best configuration tip is to have at least one managed switch in the network. So that's something that I've been having good sales efforts onto doing this kind of shifting into the budget.
JP, forgive me if my memory is incorrect. The only managed switch that we have that does not have the PoE side built in is the AMS-2600. Is there another model?
That's right. No, we don't.
Okay. So that's a good solution then for those who want to be able to save a little bit money and not buy the PoE side of it.
That's a great solution. And PoE requirements in a residential project or small commercial job, rather than the access points, it's gonna just stand if you have some PoE IP cameras, or if you have some high-end automation touch panels, like from, I don't know, Savant, Control Forward, or whatever. So it depends on your network architecture, but that's a really, really good solution that you can always have a managed switch in between. And don't be afraid to work with managed switches. We'll look into the configuration of a VLAN that is going to be really, really simple. And there's also, you can rely on Luxul, on Polaris, and on audio video export. So you have 3 points of connection. You can always go through first through audio video export. But if you need something else, as Nick stated at the beginning, we have our entire team. We're 10 people inside Polaris, and we have the entire team on Luxul to help us on any network design that you need.
Yep, and bear in mind, Luxul switches and products, they all come with a 3-year warranty and lifetime technical support. So even if a product is out of warranty, they will still support it if you needed assistance in order to be able to how to configure those VLANs or you can't find the right thing. It's not a problem to ever get in touch with us for them.
Yep. So we're going to step a little bit into how roaming works outside the Luxul environment and inside the Luxul environment. So when you have a single access point or just a single wireless router in a network, we don't have roaming issues because there's no roaming. There's no hopping, in between one access point to the other on a device. So roaming will occur whenever you have more than one access point associated to that network. So typically, it will connect to the first, and when it doesn't see any more network from the first access point, it will hook up to the other. And you can see the colors in between the ones we talk about having been into green and solid yellow. You should always overlap a little between those lower than -70. You should definitely be looking into having another access point emitting into that range in your project. So the first thing you should consider is having a wireless controller. So this is our beginner wireless controller. It's our XWC 1000. We have a 2000 that's available for shipping right now, that it supports up to 32 access points. This right now that we're looking into the screen will support only unto 16 access points. So it has a simple setup and management. Remember, the wireless router, it comes with a wireless controller built in, and that's the one we're going to use on the example that we're going to look in a couple of minutes. So when to use it? Anytime you have more than 2 access points. I think it's the best way to do it on a wireless network, and you will see why. Because it will optimize your roaming and simplify your wireless network management. So this is the example of how roaming will work outside a Luxul environment. So this is what's called a passive roaming, and some manufacturers in the industry, they call it fast roaming. So this is an example of 2 access points being configured on the same network with the same SSID. So the first one will come, a device will come, and it will see 2 access points. One having more signal strength than the other, so it will obviously connect to the one on your left. So you started using internet, you started using your wireless connection, but you suddenly start to move. When you start to move, it will continue looking at the access point, and when it sees that you have a lower signal that's lower than -70, then it will overlook into roaming. But the thing is that this process, it's always the decision of doing the roaming, it's left entirely to the device. And this is where the problem starts. And this is basically the problem. It's because devices tend to be sticky. They don't want to lose connection. So they will do the roaming decision by themselves when they are overlooking into having poor Wi-Fi connection. And I know that you always have experienced end users that claim, I'm standing beyond the access point and I have like no signal or just one barcode of signal. And that's because the device, it's being sticky or being connected to the first access point that it got connected, and it's not doing the roaming because the roaming decision is being left entirely to the client. And this is where the problem starts to occur. So when they have this problem, they will be having intermittent internet connections. They will not be able to do streaming from audio video services. They will not be able to control their lighting system or their home automation or their Sonos system. So this is where the entire network starts to crash for the end user. So how does Luxul work these things around? First of all, it's called active roaming, and it's not passive roaming. And you'll see what the difference from passive being the decision made by the client, in this case, the device that's connected to your wireless network, or being an active, that someone between the network is managing the roaming process, and this is going to be the controller. So the device starts its Wi-Fi connection. It will look at two access points, same range that we saw on the past example, the passive roam assist. So the thing that's differently is that the access points, after looking into the device, will tell the controller the amount of signal strength each of them has connected to the device. So in this case, the controller will tell the first access point to connect to the left access point on your screen. And when it starts to move, it will continuously report the amount of signal strength from the access points to the controllers in order for the controller to be monitoring. And when it drops below -70 and it has another access point that has more strength to it, it will automatically tell the first access point to do roam to the device, disconnect from left on the screen access point, and actually, connect to the right access point on the screen. And this is where the active part of the roaming process comes into, because it's not a decision based on your device that's sticky by nature. It's a decision based on the information the access points provide to the controller, and the controller decides to what access point he's going to clear up connection to it. So this is something, and this is why you should consider adding, every time you need a controller, an access on a wireless network, to add a wireless controller. And remember, on the wireless router, you can only deploy 2 access points more into that controller built in your wireless router. So Wi-Fi setup, and we're going to start with the basics in configuration of the Wi-Fi. So all of our access points, besides the outdoor access point, will have the ability on the wireless settings to create either a 2.4 gigahertz network and a 5 gigahertz network. So you'll see that first you need to enable or disable that specific frequency. So in this screen you're looking into, you'll see that the 5 gigahertz option is being disabled or not used. So you'll need to configure it if you need to. Most of home automation equipment like lighting control and some audio, video gear will only connect to a 2.4 gigahertz connection. So always have a 2.4 radio enabled, and not only rely on a 5 gigahertz, because you step into some equipment not having a 5 gigahertz network wireless card, and they will not be able to connect to that network. So after configuring both channels, you go into wireless profiles and create the SSIDs for each of the frequencies. You'll need to create your main wireless SSID for your 2.4 and your main wireless SSID for your 5.0. You can name it the same. So if you have it, name it the same, like I have it at home, the device that's going to connect to the network, it will decide on what to connect. First of all, like devices like Apple devices, iPads, iPhones, MacBooks, Mac Minis, or whatever, they always have a 5 GHz network card. So the only thing you need to rely on is remembering that you're gonna need a good 5 GHz coverage, because if not, you're gonna be having a little bit of problems. If not, you always can name both SSIDs differently. You'll see some examples going on main Wi-Fi 2.4 and main Wi-Fi 5 as names. So it's either to you on what configuration we're going to work. Also, security mode, and this is really important. The best security right now, it's under WPA2 with AES encryption. And that's the best security encryption you have on your wireless connection. Then that's the best way to do it. I think probably most of current wireless devices will be able to handle that. All automation gear will probably need some specific security mode, but I don't think if you're running into some of this kind of applications. So the first thing you need to do is configure your access points, and then you'll need to add them to the controller. So you don't need to go into each access point to configure independently. Just need to configure your wireless controller. So on your left part of the screen, you'll have the unassigned access points. So you select all your unassigned access points and add them to assigned access points. So they're under the management and from the controller. You'll need to enable, of course. I think this slide should be before the last one, but you always need to enable the controller first. Some cool feature that I think our access point has is that you can always turn out the LEDs if you need. You can turn them off. So that's a cool thing to have it. If you're installing an access point on a master bedroom or someplace like in a theater, you can always turn off the LEDs. So let's go into setting up a guest network. So I'm gonna jump out the presentation right now and go into my wireless connection on my wireless router. So all of the Luxul access points and wireless routers has this tab that's called guest network. And this guest network, it's, as Nick stated at the beginning, it's just helping you create a guest SSID, but it's not doing it on a separate VLAN. So it's being held up in the same local network than your main network, and you're not able to isolate this guest network from the main network. So it's only basically creating a separate SSID for the same LAN. So this is not the best way to do it on a wireless connection. So we're going to look into creating it through a VLAN. That's the best tip or best configuration pattern that you should use in all of your projects. So first of all, we need to create the guest Wi-Fi. So you'll go and logging into your wireless profiles again. So you already have your main 2.4 and your main 5.0 profiles created. So you're going to create a separate guest network. I'll see dealers that will restrict a guest network for 2.4 only. I see dealers that will allow the end user or the guest for that specific home to be also able to connect on 5.0. That's up to your client decision. So you need to create a new SSID. So you're gonna name it guest or whatever your end user has. You can always have a WPA2 encryption to it. And this guest Wi-Fi can work within client isolation. So that's something you need to discuss with your client. So what does client isolation mean? Client isolation means is that every device connected into that network will not be able to communicate between each other. So it's just overlooking to the access point, to the network connection, to the internet. Okay. If you want things in the guest network to communicate between each other, don't put or don't enable this client isolation. Okay. So after configuring your guest wireless on both 2.4 and 5.0, you need to go into creating a VLAN specifically. If you're using a switch and the access points, always when configuring a VLAN, you should start from the outside to the inside. So you should always start by configuring the access points. Then you should move into configuring the VLAN into the switch. And then at the end, configure the VLAN into your router. And the best way to do this configuration is plug your computer directly to an Ethernet port in your router. And this is because every time you create and save a VLAN configuration into that device, let's say the access point first, you're going to tag the data or put an identifier of that VLAN or the multiple VLANs you're creating, and you'll lose connection to it temporarily. So the best way to do it is from the outside to the inside and being connected directly to your router physically. So after creating your VLAN configuration, you're going to put a VLAN ID. That's the number. You can go between 1 and I remember 4,000 or something. Yeah, we have a lot of VLANs for you to create. Don't be that creative. Just go 2, 3, 4, 5. Then the description of the VLAN configuration. And there's another parameter that's called inter-VLAN routing. So inter-VLAN routing, if you enable it, it will allow a device connected into this VLAN ID 2 to be able to talk into the other VLANs configured in the system. So this will probably be not being enabled on your guest network, because that's the main purpose of creating a guest network, is not to have access to your main network. But if you create, let's say, a VLAN for surveillance system, well, you need to access that from your main network. So you probably want to enable inter-VLAN routing for that VLAN configuration. You should be careful when you are working with home automation systems, because most of home automation systems will work with broadband connections and we'll be broadcasting messages between their controllers and accessories, and broadcast messages are being stopped in the VLAN configuration. So you should be careful when doing that configuration with home automation systems. So we're going to jump into the live connection right now, and we'll go first into my wireless profile, and I'm going to create, as we said, a new SSID for a network. So I'm going to be calling and naming this a guest network. I don't need a client isolation, and I'm going to put security mode into WPA2, and I'm just going to place whatever password I want right now. So I'll apply changes. This is all being live and
JP, it looks like we lost your audio there. Can you hear us? We can still see your screen.
and start creating a VLAN.
JP,
Sorry?
can you zoom in a little bit to better be able to see, please?
Okay, let me. Are you able now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Is that better? Yes, better. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm working on a 4K monitor and I see things a little awkward. So the first thing you need to do is enable VLANs on your configuration. Okay. So it will have a message that you should configure the HTTP server and assign access points before enabling VLANs. Okay. That's something that we already done in the configuration. And you'll see three tabs of information. The active VLANs, right now we only have one, the main or management VLAN. The port VLAN IDs that are being configured into the LANs, because we can assign a different VLAN to every LAN, and the wireless networks created. So you'll see that I have my main network created on the 2.4 that's called FAMGM, and I only created a guest under 2.4. So first thing I need to do is add a new VLAN. So I'll go into add, I'll name this ID 2, I'll call this my guest VLAN. I will be disabling inter-VLAN router, and I want first this one to be starting at, let's say, 2 instead of 1. Okay, and for example, you can restrict. So this is going to give 100 DHCP connections. You can leave it like that or not. I tend to restrict a little bit more. So let's say I'll have only able to open 50 simultaneous connections to that guest network. Okay, or you can do it even better, less. So that's up to what you discuss with your client. But the most important thing right now is, after doing this, you need to create or hook your SSID, whatever you want from this, to your VLAN configuration. So in this case, we're configuring the guest. So I'm gonna assign this guest SSID to this VLAN ID. Okay, and this is just going to be saving it and it's going to ask for me just one port, and that's going to be, I'll do this on 2 or 4, sorry. I'm just going to do cancel right now, because if not, the router, it's going to probably ask me for a reboot, and I'm going to lose your connection. So this is the only thing you need to do in order to configure that wireless SSID into that guest network. So right now we only did it to that wireless router configured, that wireless access point, sorry, that's built in my wireless router. So if you have more than one access point, you're gonna do this same configuration in the switch on the port that you have your access points connected to it, okay? And that's something that we might be able to do on the next webinar, to be able to go into deep onto creating that VLAN configuration as well on the switches. So a couple of extra things that we have built into our Luxul products is remote management. I talked to you, we work with the mods as a service. It's included, the software, it's included on the router, so you don't need to place any other extra hardware. You just need to configure your domots application, and that will give you core features like power management, reports, remote access, diagnostics, alerts, and a lot more of information. Other built-in software that we have is the internet management software. That's called Router Limits. These two softwares are not Luxul softwares. These are third-party softwares. The first one, the remote management, it does have a cost for the dealer. Router Limits, it's free inside your local area network. So it will give you time control by device, content control by device, and basically manage all the internet connection per groups. So you'll assign first or create the groups you need, assign devices to each of the groups, and then you create the rules, limits into every group. So it's not a per device management, it's a per group management. And every time a new device connects to the network, it will automatically be directed to the guest group on the router limits. So router limits will also work outside your local network. So you can configure it to work within iPhones that are having 3G, 4G connections, or if you're connecting into a different or separate wireless network. But that feature, it does have cost for the end user, but it has a recurring revenue for the dealer, because every time a dealer has a customer that enables that outside local network management, it will automatically deliver 40 points of that pro router limits setup. So that's bringing a recurring revenue to your networks. And I think having this internet management, I've seen that this tool has helped me close Luxul jobs just because of the feature that this has. Because right now it's a lot of considerations when family has Wi-Fi internet connections. A lot of parents are really concerned of what their kids are looking into. So I think this is a cool feature that it's a plus on selling Luxul as well. Some useful tools that we recommend that you guys can use in the field. So IP scanners. There's a lot of IP scanners we recommend this for. So we have advanced IP scanner that's working Windows, Angry IP scanner that's working on Windows and Mac. I personally use LANScan and Fing. Fing, it's an iOS and Android application. Just as a parenthesis, Domots, it's also a Fing application. So the guys that created Fing are the guys that created Domots, that's a remote management application. So it's a really, really robust system that you have available for you. Also something that's really useful, it's measuring signal strength. And this is something that if you haven't considered investing or trying it out, I recommend that you do this site service in every job after finishing you have. Either you have it with a free application or software into a computer, or if you buy things like your Wi-Fi or some other hardware tool that will help you doing signal strength and site survey applications. So I want to just pop out that Apple Airport, to those out there that has an iPhone, it does have an included signal strength solution that you just need to enable. And to enable, you just go to settings, you lower until you see the airport utility, and at the bottom you'll see a Wi-Fi scanner that's being turned off by default. So you just need to turn it on, and whenever you go into the airport utility, you'll see that you have at the top right corner, you'll have a button that will say Wi-Fi scan, and it will scan your network and see signal strength for each of the access points you have deployed on that specific project. So this is what we wanted to discuss as a topic. I think next webinar, it's going to be on configuring VLANs onto the switches. That's a more in-depth configuration. So if it's time for Q&A, if anyone has some questions, comments, please, we're gonna stay a little longer in the webinar if you want to.
Well, just for the interest of time, JP, we ran a little bit later than fine. I mean, it was all really great information. If you can swap the slide over to the contact info page. If anybody's got whatever questions it is that you have, please feel free to get in touch with myself. JP is also available, as well as Luxul directly. And just again, in the interest of time and not delaying this any further, go ahead and just shoot me an email directly. It's not a problem. We'll make sure that whatever questions you've got answered, if you didn't have a chance to get it answered in the questions box, we are here for you, whatever it is that you need, and we really appreciate it. And JP, thanks so much again, and looking forward to round number 2 in Spanish tomorrow.
Thank you, guys, and see you tomorrow.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.